On November 12, 2014, an unexplainable creature followed Kevin Boone into the Olympic Peninsula. He returned hours later in utter shock with terrifying 43-second footage. When investigators reviewed the clip, everyone was in complete disbelief of what they saw. A horrifying figure stared back at the camera, 8 feet tall, covered in fur, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Kevin had always felt comfortable in the wilderness. Growing up in rural Oregon, he had learned to read animal signs before he could properly tie his shoes. Northridge Optics had contracted him for what should have been a straightforward assignment: field test 5 prototype thermal trail cameras designed for wildlife documentaries. The company needed data on clarity, trigger response time, and durability under harsh conditions. For Kevin, the job was simple incentive: good pay, minimal oversight, and a bonus for every usable capture in a span of 2 weeks. It should have been routine work, but routine doesn't explain what he found. Kevin had been hunting in these Washington woods for 3 years. He had chosen a section of the Hoh rainforest that locals called the kill zone, not for any sinister reason, but because of the extraordinary concentration of predator activity. Cougar signs were everywhere: scratch marks on trees, scat deposits, and the scattered remains of deer kills. For a camera test focused on capturing large predators, it was perfect. Kevin pulled his truck to a stop at the first waypoint, checking his GPS coordinates against the hand-drawn map spread across his dashboard. The rain had intensified, turning the dirt road into a muddy slurry that would make extraction difficult if his truck got stuck. He grabbed his backpack, loaded with the first camera unit, mounting hardware, and 5 pounds of fresh venison. By noon, Kevin had installed all 5 cameras across a 3-mile stretch of forest. The unit was state-of-the-art, capable of detecting heat signatures at distances up to 200 yards, with motion activation sensitive enough to trigger on a mouse. Each one was positioned to monitor a different type of terrain: creek crossings, ridge lines, dense undergrowth, and open meadows. Kevin logged every detail: coordinates, settings, weather, photos, exactly the way Northridge Optics paid him to. He even had spare cameras just in case the previous ones fail. The bait stations were strategically placed to attract cougars, black bears, and other large predators that might test the camera's capabilities. He had no idea something else might test him instead. As he hiked back toward his truck, Kevin felt a growing sense of unease. The forest seemed too quiet. In his experience, healthy ecosystems buzzed with activity: birds calling, squirrels chattering, insects humming. But the kill zone felt muted, as if the usual inhabitants had fled or gone into hiding. He said that he initially dismissed the feeling as fatigue and weather-induced paranoia. Hours of hiking through rain-soaked terrain would make anyone jumpy. Kevin loaded his gear into the truck and drove back to his motel in Forks, a small logging town that served as his base of operations. He would return in 48 hours to check the cameras and download their memory cards. Those 48 hours would mark the last time Kevin felt safe in the woods. 2 days later, Kevin returned to check his cameras. The rain had stopped, but the forest floor remained saturated and treacherous. The first sign that something was wrong came when he reached the creek crossing. The camera was gone, not just missing, violently removed. The mounting bracket remained attached to the cedar trunk, but it had been twisted apart with tremendous force. Metal components that should have required tools to separate lay scattered across the forest floor. Kevin found the camera itself 40 feet away, partially buried under a pile of fallen branches. The unit was destroyed. The lens housing was cracked, the battery compartment crushed, and the memory card slot bent backward at an impossible angle. Whatever had done this possessed strength far beyond any animal Kevin had encountered. Even a large black bear would have simply knocked the camera down, not systematically dismantled it. Something intelligent had handled that machine. But why? Kevin photographed the damage and made detailed notes, then continued to the second location. This camera was intact, but had been moved. Instead of pointing toward the bait station, it now faced directly up into the canopy, as if something had deliberately redirected its view. The memory card was missing, the plastic slot pulled outward with enough force to crack the surrounding housing. At the third location, Kevin found something that made his blood run cold. The camera remained in position, but the ground around the bait station had been disturbed in a pattern unlike anything he had seen before. Large, deep impressions in the soft earth suggested something massive had moved through the area. But these weren't paw prints or hoof marks. They were elongated depressions that looked almost like oversized human footprints. Kevin knelt beside the clearest impression and placed his hand next to it for scale. The print was nearly 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, with what appeared to be toe marks at the front. The depth suggested a creature weighing at least 400 pounds, possibly more. But the stride length between prints was over 6 feet, far longer than any known animal in the Pacific Northwest. He photographed the prints from multiple angles, using his field ruler for scale reference. Whatever had made these tracks walked upright on 2 legs and possessed a gait unlike any human or known primate. The implication sent a chill down Kevin's spine. The fourth camera location yielded more disturbing evidence. The unit hung from its mounting strap, swaying gently in the breeze. But when Kevin examined it closely, he discovered that the lens had been deliberately covered with mud and vegetation, not randomly but carefully, as if something had wanted to blind the camera without destroying it entirely. But why damage the others, while some were partially altered? The bait station told an even stranger story. The venison remained untouched, but the surrounding area had been cleared of all vegetation in a perfect circle, roughly 20 feet in diameter. Branches, ferns, and moss had been removed and stacked in neat piles at the circle's perimeter. In the center of the cleared space sat a single, flat stone that hadn't been there during Kevin's initial setup. Kevin approached the stone cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung across his shoulder. The rock was roughly 3 feet in diameter and appeared to have been carried from elsewhere. Its composition didn't match the local geology. Arranged around it in a spiral pattern were bones, lots of bones. What could do something like this? Deer ribs and leg bones formed the inner spiral, their surfaces clean and white as if they had been stripped of all flesh and marrow. Moving outward, Kevin identified raccoon skulls, what appeared to be elk vertebrae, and several bones too large to belong to any animal he recognized. The arrangement was deliberate, artistic even, with each bone placed at precise intervals to maintain the spiral's symmetry. Was this the work of a person, or something trying to imitate one? Kevin had seen predator feeding sites before, but nothing like this. Cougars and bears were messy eaters, leaving scattered remains and obvious signs of their feeding behavior. This looked more like a ritual or display, the work of intelligence, not instinct. As Kevin documented the scene, he became aware of a sound that made his skin crawl, a low, rhythmic clicking that seemed to come from the forest around him. It wasn't the random noise of branches rubbing together or rocks settling. This was deliberate, almost like a form of communication. The clicking sound grew more distinct as Kevin crouched beside the bone spiral, his camera capturing every detail of the macabre arrangement. According to him, the rhythm was too regular to be natural. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, repeat. It seemed to emanate from multiple directions simultaneously, as if whatever was making the sound was moving through the forest canopy above him. How many of them were there? Kevin's training kicked in. He had spent years in predator territory and knew that unusual sounds often preceded dangerous encounters. Mountain lions were known to stalk prey for hours before attacking, and black bears could move with surprising stealth when motivated. But this clicking pattern didn't match any animal behavior he had studied. He finished photographing the bone spiral and moved quickly toward the 5th camera location, his rifle now unslung and ready. The clicking followed him, maintaining the same distance, but never quite revealing its source. Kevin paused several times, scanning the forest canopy through his rifle scope, but saw nothing beyond the usual tangle of branches and moss. The final camera had been completely destroyed. Kevin found pieces of it scattered across a 100-yard radius, as if it had been torn apart and hurled in different directions with tremendous force. What kind of animal rips metal apart like paper? Kevin considered leaving, but daylight was fading fast, and his vehicle was several miles back through dense terrain. If he left now, he'd lose the site's exact layout and any chance to document how the equipment had been disturbed. He decided to stay through dusk and collect sound overnight, standard protocol for unexpected field anomalies. He later told investigators that as evening settled over the canopy, he began to hear movement circling just beyond the tree line, deliberate and steady, as if measuring distance. That night, Kevin sheltered beneath a tarp near the destroyed camera site. He organized his gear by headlamp, cataloging fragments and photographing the damage. The evidence was undeniable. Something large, deliberate, and strong had dismantled the setup piece by piece. The bone spiral alone suggested reasoning beyond instinct, but what unsettled him most was its precision. Every tripod leg was laid parallel, every lens facing outward, as though arranged for him to find. By midnight, his hands were shaking from adrenaline. He huddled beside his tent, rifle across his knees, and watched the tree line through thermal scope. Once, a faint shape appeared on the screen, upright, tall, heat signature steady. It lingered for several seconds, then stepped backward and vanished. He drafted a field report on his laptop, intending to send it once he regained signal. He attached selected photographs, but he mentioned holding back the most disturbing images, the bone spiral and the massive footprints. He said that sharing those details might complicate his professional relationship with the company. The next morning, he walked back to the equipment cache to salvage data from the damaged units. Most were ruined, memory cards torn, casings cracked, as if twisted apart by hand. Only one camera remained intact, half buried in moss and tilted toward the canopy. It held a single undamaged video file, time-stamped just after dusk. Kevin hesitated before pressing play, realizing the device had been turned on long after he'd left the area the night before. Was this what it wanted him to find? The footage was brief, lasting only 43 seconds, but what it showed made Kevin's hands shake as he watched it on his laptop screen. The thermal imaging revealed a large heat signature moving through the frame at approximately 2:17 a.m. The figure was clearly bipedal, standing at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms that swung in a distinctly non-human gait. But what made the footage truly unsettling was the creature's behavior. It approached the camera directly, as if aware of its presence, and appeared to study the device for several seconds. The creature's proportions were wrong for any known animal. Its torso was too broad, its arms too long, its head too large. The thermal image showed the creature's head tilting from side to side in what looked like curiosity or assessment. Then the feed cuts to static. Had it known that he would see this later? Despite his growing unease, the hunter in him refused to back down. He'd tracked apex predators his entire adult life, and whatever was out there had challenged him on his own ground. His pack held barely enough provisions to last another day, yet he told himself that was all the time he'd need to prove what he'd seen. But at that moment, did he ever stop to consider whether he was still the hunter, or if he had already become the prey? That afternoon, he had set up his personal backup cameras before dark and established a separate camp where he could monitor the area overnight. If something was living in the kill zone, he intended to document it properly. He established his base camp in a small clearing, roughly half a mile from the original camera locations. The spot offered good visibility in multiple directions while providing cover from the surrounding trees. Kevin set up a camouflaged blind, arranged his monitoring equipment, and prepared for a long night of observation. As darkness fell, Kevin activated his new camera network. He had positioned 6 units in a rough perimeter around the bone spiral site, each equipped with motion sensors and infrared illumination. His base camp monitor would display feeds from all cameras simultaneously, allowing him to track movement across the entire area. The first few hours passed quietly. Kevin's screens showed the usual parade of small nocturnal animals. He began to wonder if whatever had destroyed his original cameras had moved on to other territory, or was it watching from just beyond the glow of his screens? At 11:47 p.m., the motion sensor alarm chimed softly. Camera 3, positioned near the creek crossing, had detected something large moving through its field of view. Kevin leaned forward, studying the thermal display as a massive heat signature emerged from the tree line. The creature was even larger than the previous footage had suggested. Standing fully upright, it towered at least 8 feet tall, with a body mass that Kevin estimated at over 500 pounds. Its movements were fluid and purposeful as it approached the creek, pausing to examine the area where Kevin's original camera had been destroyed. Kevin held his breath as the creature moved closer to camera 3. The thermal imaging revealed incredible detail. The creature's face was distinctly primate-like, but far more robust than any known species. Its brow ridge was pronounced, its jaw massive, and its eyes reflected the camera's infrared illumination with an eerie green glow. But what struck Kevin most was the creature's obvious intelligence. It examined the new camera setup with the same methodical attention it had shown before, tilting its head and reaching out with one enormous hand to touch the mounting bracket. For a moment, Kevin thought it might destroy this camera as well. Instead, the creature did something that chilled him to the bone. It looked directly into the camera lens, as if aware that someone was watching from the other end. The message was unmistakable. The creature knew that Kevin was somewhere nearby and was warning him, threatening even. Kevin's hands trembled as he reached for his rifle, but the creature had already melted back into the forest with surprising stealth for something so large. The thermal cameras tracked its movement for several minutes as it circled the perimeter of Kevin's monitoring network, always staying just beyond clear visual range, but making its presence known. And then at 12:23 a.m., all 6 cameras went dark simultaneously. Kevin stared at his blank monitors in disbelief. The cameras had been functioning perfectly moments before, and the odds of 6 separate units failing at exactly the same time were astronomical. He tried cycling through different feeds, adjusting settings, even rebooting the entire system, but nothing worked. Kevin made the decision to abandon his damaged equipment and move deeper into the forest instead of retreating. Whatever was out there had demonstrated the ability to disable sophisticated electronics and possessed an intelligence far beyond any known animal. Leaving now would mean losing the only evidence he had, and 2 days of isolation, turning back through miles of dense terrain, felt riskier than holding his position. As he repacked what gear still worked, Kevin said he heard the clicking sound again. This time it was closer, coming from multiple directions at once. The rhythm had changed, faster now, more urgent, almost agitated. He shouldered his pack and moved toward higher ground, using his handheld GPS to mark a temporary shelter site. The clicking followed him, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always keeping the same distance. Kevin resisted the urge to run, knowing that flight might trigger a predatory pursuit response from whatever was stalking him. He said that the hike through the ravine felt endless. Every shadow seemed to conceal movement. Every sound suggested something pacing his steps. The clicking grew louder and more intricate, as if multiple sources were communicating, reacting to his movements in real time. By midnight, his flashlight was dimming. Kevin found a narrow rise above a stream bed and made camp beneath a cedar, his rifle across his knees. He stayed awake through the night, but by then, the forest moved and breathed as it should. Owls calling from the ridgeline, the faint rustle of small animals in the brush, wind shifting through the branches. Nothing was now out of place. Near dawn, he realized that whatever was following him had left. When the first light filtered through the canopy, Kevin made a decision that would define the rest of his notes. He would not leave the forest until he could prove what he had encountered. The hunter in him demanded closure, even as every instinct told him to run. He decided to return to the area where he first set up his cameras, a decision leaning more on instinct than reason. But what exactly was waiting for him to take one step too far? The previous night's unease hadn't faded. It had curdled into something heavier, almost magnetic. His remaining food could barely last another day, but the thought of leaving empty-handed felt worse than the hunger. He kept telling himself that every broken branch, every distant crack of wood had an explanation. That if he could just catch one clear track, one print, it would all make sense again. By noon, fog had rolled in thick and cold, muffling sound and sight alike. He followed his GPS coordinates back toward the creek crossing where the last camera had been found. The forest felt rearranged, wrong in small ways. The markings on the birch he'd cut the day before were gone, replaced by fresh gouges higher up, far above his reach. He stopped several times to listen, but the silence pressed in, absolute. When he finally reached the clearing, it was as if something had been waiting for him to return. The first sign that something had changed came when he reached the clearing where he had established his monitoring station. His equipment was gone, not scattered or destroyed like the original cameras, but completely absent. The camouflaged blind had been dismantled with surgical precision, its components stacked in neat piles at the clearing's edge. Kevin approached the equipment piles cautiously, his rifle ready. The organization was too methodical to be the work of scavenging animals. Someone or something had carefully sorted his gear by type and function. Electronic equipment in one pile, camping gear in another, tools and hardware in a third. But it was the fourth pile that made Kevin's blood run cold. His 6 thermal cameras had been arranged in a perfect circle, their lenses all pointing inward toward a single object placed at the center. A flat stone identical to the one he had found at the bone spiral site. Was this a warning or an invitation? Kevin said that he photographed the arrangement from multiple angles, then carefully examined each camera. None showed signs of damage, but all had been deliberately disabled. Battery compartments had been opened and the power cells removed with surprising delicacy. Memory cards were missing, their slots bent outward with the same precise force he had observed before. The message was clear. His surveillance had been detected, analyzed, and neutralized by something with both the intelligence to understand electronic equipment and the manual dexterity to disable it without causing unnecessary damage. As he documented the scene, Kevin became aware of movement in his peripheral vision. He turned slowly, rifle raised, and said that he found himself face to face with the creature from his thermal footage. Had it been waiting for him to return all along? It stood at the edge of the clearing, partially concealed behind a massive Douglas fir, but close enough for Kevin to see details that the camera had missed. The creature was even larger than he had estimated, easily 9 feet tall, with a body mass that dwarfed any known primate. He said that its fur was reddish-brown, thick and coarse, covering a frame that suggested incredible physical power. For several seconds, man and creature regarded each other across the clearing. Kevin's finger rested on his rifle's trigger, but something in the creature's posture suggested that it posed no immediate threat. It stood perfectly still, watching him with the same attention it had shown his cameras. Then the creature did something that shattered Kevin's remaining skepticism about its intelligence. It raised one massive hand and pointed deliberately at Kevin's rifle, then shook its head slowly from side to side. The gesture was unmistakably human, a clear communication that weapons were unnecessary. Kevin found himself lowering his rifle despite every survival instinct screaming at him to maintain a defensive posture. The creature nodded once, a gesture of approval or perhaps gratitude, then stepped fully into the clearing. Kevin said that, up close, the creature's size was overwhelming. But despite its intimidating physical presence, its movements were careful and controlled, suggesting a being that was acutely aware of its own strength. Was this intelligence or empathy, or something far beyond both? The creature approached Kevin's arranged equipment and gestured toward the cameras with one enormous hand. Then it looked directly at Kevin and made a series of soft clicking vocalizations, clearly intended as communication. The sounds were low and melodic, almost like a primitive form of speech. Kevin realized that the creature was trying to explain something about the cameras, perhaps why it had disabled them. Kevin said that it moved closer, close enough that he could smell its distinctive odor. He described it as not unpleasant, but wild and earthy, like moss and cedar mixed with something uniquely animal. The creature examined Kevin with obvious curiosity, tilting its massive head to study him from multiple angles. What, in that moment, did it see when it looked at him? An intruder? An equal? Or a mistake that needed correcting? Then, in a moment that would replay in Kevin's mind for the rest of his life, the creature lifted one massive arm and pointed slowly, deliberately, toward the tree line behind him. The gesture was unmistakable. Leave. Kevin froze, the rifle half raised, instinct warring with reason. The creature didn't advance. It just stood there, breathing heavily, its eyes fixed on him with something that wasn't rage, but warning. Without warning, it dropped to all fours and exploded forward in a short, thunderous bluff charge, stopping just short of him, exhaling a deep, guttural roar that shook the air. Mud and leaves sprayed up between them. The message couldn't have been clearer. Whatever this thing was, it wanted him gone. Now. Kevin backed away, step by step, not daring to turn his back until the shape faded into the mist. He'd seen something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that had looked at him with recognition. He hiked back toward the logging road in silence, the forest unnervingly still around him. By the time he reached his truck, mist had swallowed the trees, and he said it felt less like he'd escaped, more like he'd been allowed to leave. 2 days later, Kevin submitted his findings, thermal images, detailed field notes, to Northridge Optics and a regional wildlife research group. Within days, internal emails surfaced describing his report as psychotic field fiction. Both organizations cut ties immediately, citing inconsistencies in timestamps, missing metadata, and observer fatigue. The footage was quietly removed from the shared server, and his contract was terminated. He tried going public. Local radio hosts treated his account as entertainment, not evidence. Wildlife experts and skeptics flooded forums with breakdowns of his data, pointing out compression artifacts, GPS drift, and pareidolia in the thermal stills. A state biologist labeled the footage a starving black bear with patchy fur, and a local outdoor magazine ran a short piece titled The Boone Hoax. Still, the 11 seconds of dashcam footage leaked. The clip showed a massive shape crossing a logging road at dawn, dragging what looked like a deer carcass. It paused, just long enough to seem aware of the camera, then vanished into the trees. Independent analysts confirmed the file hadn't been tampered with, but most insisted it was a man in ghillie camouflage or a forced perspective trick caused by mist and distance. Wildlife officers who revisited the site noted the ring of bones described in his report, but dismissed it as scavenger scatter from cougars or coyotes. A regional ranger later stated, "Everything about that area fits normal predation patterns. Nothing supernatural here, just a hunter who stayed too long and scared himself." Even online, believers were outnumbered. Debunkers slowed the video frame by frame, marking limb ratios and shadow inconsistencies. A university anthropology forum tore apart his measurements, calling them an amateur's guesswork.